Let's take a closer look at these shocking historical photos. Write in the comments which photo you like the most. Walter Freeman turned the transorbital lobotomy into a widely known treatment, performing thousands of procedures despite having no surgical training. His career ended in 1967 after his final patient did not survive, and the hospital removed his operating privileges. Operation Paperclip brought more than 1,600 German specialists to the United States after the Second World War. Its name came from paper clips used to mark selected files, while troubling parts of some wartime records were quietly softened or removed. In 1954, Annie Wilkins left Maine on horseback after doctors warned that she might not have long to live. With her horse, Tarzan, and her dog, she crossed thousands of miles and reached California through remarkable courage and the kindness of strangers. On December 5, 1970, Elvis Presley served as best man at the wedding of his lifelong friend, Memphis radio host George Klein. The playful photo shows Elvis joking beside the groom and Barbara Little during a rare private moment away from the stage. George Williams began performing in American sideshows as a child and later became known as a musician, comedian, and sharp-witted entertainer. He likely lived with osteogenesis imperfecta, yet audiences remembered his humor, confidence, and love of cards and billiards. During the First World War, soldiers lived and moved through endless trench systems, while artillery turned the surrounding fields into deep craters and broken earth. More than a century later, many of those trenches still cut across the landscape, their exact shapes preserved beneath peaceful grass. In 1964, President Lyndon Johnson confronted Senator Richard Russell, a powerful leader of the filibuster, against the Civil Rights Act. Johnson used relentless pressure and his deep knowledge of Congress to help force the historic law through. Young Japanese pilots gather around a mechanical training rig as an instructor demonstrates how an aircraft responds to its controls. Before taking a real plane into the air, trainees practiced each movement on the ground, turning difficult flight lessons into clear physical drills. In 1992, Thea Muldoon sat beside two members of New Zealand's Black Power group after a memorial service for her husband, former Prime Minister Robert Muldoon. Their quiet conversation created one of the most unexpected and memorable images from the day. Thomas Midgley helped introduce Freon, a refrigerant once celebrated as clean, safe, and perfect for modern homes and factories. Decades later, scientists discovered that chlorine from these chemicals was breaking apart the ozone layer, allowing more harmful ultraviolet light to reach Earth. In 1942, Heinrich Himmler examined freshly picked cotton during an official visit to German-occupied Crimea. The strange inspection reflected Nazi plans to turn the region into a major source of food and raw materials for the German war economy. By 1938, Sachsenhausen had become a major Nazi camp where prisoners were forced to build barracks, factories, and much of the complex around them. The numbered uniforms and colored triangles seen here identified each prisoner and the category assigned to them by the camp system. In 1951, about 4,000 white residents of Cicero, Illinois, surrounded an apartment building after a black family tried to move in. The unrest lasted for days, exposing how openly housing segregation was defended in many American suburbs. On July 12, 1943, Soviet and German armored forces met near Prokhorovka in one of the most famous tank battles of the Second World War. Hundreds of vehicles moved across the same fields, turning this small village into a lasting symbol of the Battle of Kursk. In 1892, Nikolai Zograf photographed rural residents from the Vladimir, Yaroslavl, and Kostroma provinces for a large study of the Russian population. The careful front and side portraits recorded faces, clothing, tools, and physical features with unusual scientific detail. Christina Skarbek, known as Christine Granville, became one of Britain's most daring secret agents during the Second World War. In France, she bluffed an officer and used a large bribe to free 3 captured agents only hours before they were due to be executed. In May 2010, survivor Candace Moncayo faced John Gardner in court and reminded him that she had struck his nose while escaping him. Her calm question about whether his nose still hurt left him visibly angry and turned the hearing into a memorable moment of courage. In 1942, Italian soldiers attended the unveiling of a monument in Tepeleni, Albania, honoring members of the Modena Division lost during the Greek campaign. The eagle, weapons, and rigid ceremony turned the site into a carefully staged symbol of sacrifice and occupation. On July 16, 1950, Uruguay shocked a packed Maracanã stadium by defeating Brazil 2-1 in the decisive World Cup match. The unexpected victory silenced nearly 200,000 spectators and became one of football's most legendary upsets. In the 1960s, soldiers of the Albanian People's Army trained with a Soviet-designed 85mm air defense cannon and Simonov rifles. The carefully staged drill reflected Albania's intense military buildup during its years of growing political isolation. In 1921, giant listening horns at Bowling Field in Washington, District of Columbia, helped operators detect aircraft before radar existed. The device amplified distant engine noise and estimated its direction, but wind and background sounds often reduced its accuracy. Around 1978, photographer Gianfranco Gorgoni captured 2 Native American women in Rapid City, South Dakota, wearing patterned dresses, beadwork, and long braids. Their open laughter makes the portrait feel alive, preserving culture and personality far beyond a formal historical pose. In 1933, Liverpool employed 10 full-time rat catchers across the city and docks, where they captured more than 20,000 rats in 1 year. Some were examined by the city bacteriologist for dangerous infections before outbreaks could spread through the busy port. In 1946, visitors at Rockaway Beach in New York were expected to cover their swimsuits with robes whenever they left the sand. Photographer Sam Shear captured police issuing tickets to beachgoers who ignored the rule, showing how strictly public dress codes were once enforced. In February 1942, Australian airmen examined the wreckage of a Japanese Mitsubishi Zero near Darwin after the first major air attack on Australia. The fighter came from the carrier Hiryu, making the image a rare close view of an enemy aircraft recovered almost intact. In 1987, Salvadoran families lived in the Mesa Grande refugee camp in Honduras after fleeing the civil war across the border. The rough shelters, dirt lanes, and daily chores show how thousands built a temporary town while waiting years for a safe return home. In September 1979, Austrian bodybuilder Arnold Schwarzenegger relaxed aboard a yacht in Marina del Rey with an unidentified woman. The casual scene captures him before his rise to global film fame and years before he entered American politics. On August 19, 1944, French resistance fighters began an uprising in Paris, building barricades and using whatever weapons they could find against the German occupation forces. Men and women held key streets for days until Allied troops entered the capital and the city was liberated. On December 7, 1941, Japanese aircraft struck Pearl Harbor, damaging or sinking much of the United States Pacific Fleet while its aircraft carriers were away. The attack was meant to cripple American power, but instead it united the country and brought the United States into the Second World War. These captured followers of Juhayman al-Otaibi had taken part in the 1979 seizure of the Grand Mosque in Mecca, holding Islam's holiest site for nearly 2 weeks. After the standoff ended, Saudi authorities sentenced many of the men, and 63 were publicly put to death on January 9, 1980. In July 1976, Israeli commandos carried this black Mercedes inside a transport aircraft for the Entebbe rescue mission in Uganda. The car was meant to resemble President Idi Amin's official convoy, helping the team approach the airport terminal before the disguise was discovered. In 1977, Soviet schoolchildren were photographed outside the Soviet Union mission compound in North Riverdale, the Bronx. The guarded complex housed diplomats and their families, placing ordinary childhood inside a closely watched Soviet community during the Cold War. On February 12, 1944, Lieutenant Robert Fancher and his crew posed beside the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress Queenie at an airfield in England. Serving with the 91st Bomb Group, these men flew long missions over occupied Europe in one of the most famous aircraft of the war. On July 11, 1943, 23-year-old Corporal Jacob Andreas of the 82nd Airborne Division vanished during a night flight over Sicily. His transport formation was caught in a tragic wave of friendly fire, and his remains were never recovered. This photograph shows him with his sister Lydia before the mission. In 1945, acrobats performed on the turret of a Soviet tank before a huge crowd of troops stationed in Germany. The strange scene turned a military machine into a stage, giving soldiers a rare break and one of the most unforgettable performances of the final months of the war. In the spring of 1945, an unfinished German Jagdtiger lay wrecked inside the damaged Nibelungenwerk factory near St. Valentin, Austria. Built around a massive gun and heavy armor, the vehicle never reached the battlefield and became a symbol of Germany's collapsing war industry. In 1913, workers at Ford's Highland Park plant built Model T cars on a moving line that brought each task directly to them. The system cut chassis assembly from more than 12 hours to about 90 minutes, helping make cars affordable for millions and transforming factories worldwide. In April 1943, women engine wipers for the Chicago and Northwestern Railway ate lunch inside a roundhouse in Clinton, Iowa. Their dirty overalls reveal the demanding work of cleaning and servicing locomotives that kept wartime freight moving across America. In 2002, children in Basra rode through the streets waving Iraq's flag and carrying a portrait of Saddam Hussein. The cheerful scene was captured only months before the United States-led invasion transformed the country and ended his rule. On July 8, 1943, brothers Albert, Walter, and John Madden posed together on their final day at Guadalcanal. All three served with the United States Marine Corps in a reconnaissance unit that used Wildcat aircraft before returning to California. Before his historic flight in 1961, Ham the chimpanzee trained on machines that tested his reactions and ability to follow signals. In this unusually human moment, he holds a scientist's leg beside the equipment that prepared him to become the first chimpanzee in space. On August 23, 1927, Italian immigrants Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti lost their lives in Massachusetts after a trial that divided the world. Questions about the evidence and another man's confession failed to change the verdict, leaving the case controversial for generations. In July 1989, Pink Floyd performed from a floating stage in Venice, while an enormous crowd packed St. Mark's Square and watched from hundreds of boats. The free concert became legendary, but the massive audience left the historic city facing serious damage and cleanup. Pilots of the Hells Angels squadron posed beside a Curtiss Hawk fighter while serving with the American Volunteer Group in China. Known as the Flying Tigers, these volunteers became famous for defending supply routes against Japanese aircraft before the United States officially entered the war. In 1966, Mahayana monks led morning prayers and a solemn procession through the streets of Seoul, South Korea. Their layered robes and prayer books preserved centuries-old Buddhist traditions, while the city around them was rapidly modernizing. Sir Arthur Rostron became famous after guiding Carpathia through dangerous ice to rescue survivors from Titanic in 1912. Years later, he could not bring himself to watch his beloved former command Mauretania leave for dismantling, so he stood quietly on the pier and waved goodbye. In 1901, Emilio Aguinaldo, president of the First Philippine Republic, was taken aboard the United States gunboat Vicksburg after his capture. His arrest weakened organized resistance and marked a major turning point in the Philippine-American War. Shoichi Yokoi remained hidden in the jungles of Guam for nearly 28 years after the Second World War ended, surviving in a bamboo shelter with handmade tools and clothes. When two hunters found him in January 1972, he returned to Japan stunned by how completely the world had changed. In late 1991, supporters of Georgian President Zviad Gamsakhurdia took positions in central Tbilisi as an armed power struggle divided the new republic. The clashes around government buildings pushed Georgia into civil war only months after independence from the Soviet Union. On July 28, 1851, Johann Julius Friedrich Berkowski captured the first successful photograph of a total solar eclipse from an observatory in Prussia. The image revealed the sun's glowing corona around the dark moon, preserving a sight no camera had ever recorded before. A stunt performer balances on a narrow support outside an aircraft during the early age of barnstorming, when wing walking drew enormous crowds. With no modern safety gear and only wires beneath his feet, every movement had to remain perfectly controlled, high above the ground. In 1960, New Food and Drug Administration reviewer Frances Kelsey refused to approve thalidomide because its manufacturer could not prove the drug was safe. Her persistence kept it off the United States market and prevented the widespread birth defects later seen in other countries. During the Great Depression, unemployed men sometimes wore signs listing their age, skills, military service, and family responsibilities while searching city streets for work. These human job applications showed how fiercely ordinary people competed for even the most basic position. In 1992, a soldier played a Garmin beside armored vehicles during the fighting in Transnistria between Moldovan forces and separatists. The unexpected music created a brief moment of normal life in a region filled with checkpoints, military equipment, and uncertainty. In 1901, British forces attacked and burned Arachukwu during the Anglo-Aro War, targeting the capital of the powerful Aro Confederacy in southeastern Nigeria. The city's fall ended Aro political independence and helped Britain impose direct colonial control across the region. In January 1964, the Beatles walked down the Champs-Élysées in Paris as growing crowds followed their first major visit to France. Only weeks later, their American television debut would transform them from a British sensation into the most famous band in the world. In 1944, British soldiers moved through the ruins of a French city while one carried a young girl away from the shattered streets. The photograph captures a rescue in progress, showing how civilians were trapped inside the struggle to liberate France. A German Army officer examines a captured Model 1928 Thompson, an American submachine gun rarely seen in Wehrmacht service. Its compact design and high rate of fire made captured examples valuable for study, testing, and occasional battlefield use. Einar Mikkelsen and Ivar Iverson survived 28 months alone in the Arctic after their ship Alabama was lost to the ice. They had traveled across Greenland to recover records from a missing expedition, then waited through 2 brutal winters before rescue finally arrived. On December 6, 1912, Ludwig Borchardz's team uncovered the painted bust of Queen Nefertiti in the workshop of sculptor Thutmose at Amarna, Egypt. Preserved for more than 3,000 years, it became one of the most famous faces of the ancient world. In October 1972, Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571 crashed high in the Andes, leaving its passengers trapped for 72 days in freezing isolation. Only 16 of the 45 people survived after Nando Parado and Roberto Canessa crossed the mountains on foot to find help. On September 14, 1992, a young Bosnian woman waited for a funeral service at Sarajevo's Lion Cemetery with a rifle over her shoulder. Her cigarette and guarded expression show how quickly ordinary life changed during the siege, when civilians faced uncertainty every day. On Memorial Day in 1945, French teenager Hélène Chapelle and her mother knelt beside the grave of American soldier James Simonian at La Cambe Cemetery. Helene read a letter from his mother, who had asked that her words reach the son she could never visit herself. This experimental firefighting suit continuously sprayed water over the wearer, creating a moving shield against intense heat and flames. The idea never became standard because it depended on heavy hoses, reduced visibility, and made movement difficult during an emergency. In 1963, Félicette became the first and only cat sent into space, launched by France aboard a Véronique rocket on a brief research mission. She returned safely by parachute after about 13 minutes, securing a unique place in the history of space exploration. A German Junkers Ju-87 dive bomber flies over Stalingrad in 1942 as enormous columns of smoke rise from the city below. Once a symbol of German air power, the aircraft witnessed a battle that soon became one of Germany's greatest defeats. In 1949, Claude McGee arrived at Missouri State Penitentiary after being convicted in the death of a fellow inmate over a $20 debt. Already serving a life sentence for an earlier case, his booking card records the second conviction that placed him under the prison's highest penalty. In September 1943, sailors from the German submarine U-601 posed in Arctic waters beside a polar bear encountered during their patrol. The striking image shows how far these submarines operated into the frozen north, where crews faced extreme cold, isolation, and months at sea. On June 29, 1958, 17-year-old Pelé scored twice as Brazil defeated Sweden 5-2 and won its first World Cup. Overcome after the final whistle, he became the youngest player ever to score in a World Cup final and instantly emerged as a global star. In early 1944, Erwin Rommel inspected beach defenses in Normandy, including heavy wooden obstacles built to damage landing craft at high tide. Months later, Allied troops came ashore at Utah Beach and broke through the coastal defenses Germany had expected to stop the invasion. On September 11, 1905, a 9th Avenue elevated train entered a sharp Manhattan curve far above its speed limit, sending one car into the street and leaving another hanging beside an apartment building. It became New York City's most serious elevated railway accident, yet the line continued operating until 1940. During the Vietnam War, Viet Cong fighters used tiny tunnel entrances hidden beneath leaves to disappear into the forest within seconds. The underground networks held sleeping areas, supplies, command rooms, and escape routes, giving guerrilla units a major advantage over larger armies. During the Vietnam War, millions of acres of forest were sprayed with powerful herbicides to remove the dense cover used by opposing forces. The chemicals stripped vegetation, damaged farmland, and left lasting effects on soil, water, wildlife, and communities long after the fighting ended. In March 1946, women in Dresden passed heavy stones by hand as they rebuilt walls from the ruins of the devastated city. With many men absent, these workers cleared mountains of rubble and became a powerful symbol of Germany's difficult post-war recovery. In 1909, Korean nationalist Jang In-hwan was photographed after his California conviction for the death of Durham White Stevens, who defended Japan's control of Korea. The jury spared him the harshest sentence, and many Koreans later remembered him as a symbol of resistance to colonial rule. In February 1979, Iranian students celebrated the fall of the monarchy while holding a portrait of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. Their smiles capture the brief public euphoria before the Islamic Revolution transformed Iran's government, laws, and daily life. In 1974, Muhammad Ali trained on a foggy road while preparing for his historic match against George Foreman in Zaire. Photographer Ken Regan captured the lonely morning run, showing the discipline behind one of boxing's greatest comebacks. In the 1960s, thousands of young fans crowded behind police barriers, waiting for even a brief glimpse of the Beatles. Scenes like this defined Beatlemania, when concerts and public appearances could turn ordinary streets into packed waves of shouting, crying, and excitement. This rare photograph from the 1970s captures a young Soviet man posing with an unusually intense expression. The casual clothes and ordinary setting make the image striking, especially compared with the powerful public figure he would later become. Makeup artist Stuart Freeborn designed Yoda by blending his own facial features with the deep wrinkles and wise expression of Albert Einstein. Standing beside the finished puppet, he revealed that one of cinema's most famous faces was partly a self-portrait. In 1968, a United States Marine at Khe Sanh covered his protective vest with a dark joke, warning that military service could harm his health. The message captured how troops used humor to face weeks of isolation, exhaustion, and constant danger during the siege. On Christmas night in 1951, an explosive hidden beneath the bedroom of civil rights leaders Harry and Harriet Moore tore apart their Florida home. Harry lost his life that night, and Harriet 9 days later, making them among the earliest martyrs of the modern civil rights movement. In 1921, a white mob destroyed much of Tulsa's Greenwood district, one of the wealthiest black communities in the United States. Homes, churches, and businesses were reduced to ruins, leaving thousands displaced and making the event one of the darkest chapters in American history. In 1952, Marilyn Monroe and actor Dale Robertson shared a playful moment during a celebrity baseball game from the Out of This World series. The candid photograph captures Monroe before global superstardom, laughing freely as Robertson joins the joke. On August 6, 1945, a single atomic bomb exploded over Hiroshima, creating a towering cloud that rose above the city within seconds. The event destroyed much of Hiroshima and marked the first use of an atomic weapon in war, changing world history forever. In autumn 1942, Italian soldiers moved through smoke and tangled wire toward British positions during the North African campaign. The blurred figure and broken defenses capture the confusion of a battlefield where poor visibility and seconds could decide the outcome. The second one looked like an explosion from WWI. The Allies dug under a German position in Belgium, Messines Ridge. They loaded a couple 100,000 pounds of explosives and blew them sky high. The blast was so loud it is said to be heard across the English Channel in London. The first image is unfamiliar to me. In February 1944, United States Marines pulled an injured Japanese soldier from a dugout on Kwajalein Atoll during the battle for the Marshall Islands. Surrounded by men who had just been fighting him, he became part of the small number of Japanese defenders captured alive. On May 18, 1980, players continued a local baseball game as Mount St. Helens sent a giant ash cloud into the sky behind them. The surreal photograph captures an ordinary pitch unfolding beneath one of the most powerful volcanic eruptions in United States history. At a Wall of Death show in Rajkot, India, a driver circles a near-vertical wooden arena while reaching up to touch a spectator's hand. Speed and centrifugal force keep the car pressed against the wall, turning an ordinary vehicle into a breathtaking stunt machine. In 1876, Swedish teenager Carolina Olsson reportedly entered a mysterious sleep-like state that lasted more than 3 decades. When she recovered in 1908, she remembered almost nothing of the missing years, making her case one of medicine's strangest mysteries. Around 1900, a dentist used a foot-powered portable drill to treat a seated patient while others waited nearby. Before electric equipment became common, every turn of the drill depended on steady pedaling, making even a simple procedure slow and physically demanding. Milunka Savic entered the Serbian army disguised as a man and fought through the Balkan Wars and the First World War, surviving several serious injuries. Even after her identity was discovered, she returned to combat and received some of Serbia's highest honors, becoming one of history's most decorated female soldiers. On January 27, 1945, Soviet troops entered Auschwitz and found about 7,000 exhausted prisoners left behind. Boris Ignatovich photographed survivors walking beneath the camp entrance, creating one of the most powerful images of liberation. In 1926, Violet Gibson fired at Benito Mussolini as he left a medical congress in Rome, but he turned at the final moment and the bullet only grazed his nose. He appeared in public soon afterward, wearing a bandage, using the failed attack to project toughness and control. On February 1, 1943, the B-17 All-American returned to its base in Algeria after a German fighter collided with its rear fuselage over Tunisia. Despite the enormous opening that nearly separated the tail, the crew kept the aircraft airborne and landed safely. On February 6, 1971, Apollo 14 Commander Alan Shepard attached a 6-iron head to a lunar tool and struck 2 golf balls on the moon. With weak gravity and no air resistance, one ball traveled far across the surface, creating the first golf shots beyond Earth. On Christmas Day in 1944, more than 100 American B-26 Marauders attacked St. Vith, a vital German road and supply center, during the Battle of the Bulge. This aerial photograph captures the town beneath dense smoke as Allied forces tried to isolate the German advance. Sally Ann Jarrett became the beloved mascot of the 11th Pennsylvania Infantry, marching with the regiment through the American Civil War. She did not survive the Battle of Hatcher's Run in February 1865, and her image was later carved into the unit's monument at Gettysburg. Hal Blaine became one of the most recorded drummers in history and a key member of the legendary Wrecking Crew studio musicians. Over 4 decades, his drums appeared on 40 #1 hits, more than 150 top 10 songs, and thousands of famous recordings. In April 1945, a German Tiger I became trapped beside a bridge near Messina, Italy, and was abandoned as Allied forces advanced. The 60-ton tank, feared for its armor and powerful gun, was defeated here not by another tank, but by broken ground and a failed crossing. On July 15, 1942, the American tanker Pennsylvania Sun was struck by the German submarine U-571 in the Gulf of Mexico. Thick smoke rose across the sea as the damaged ship became a dramatic reminder that the war had reached waters close to the United States. In the 1930s, Wan Rong, wife of Puyi, the last emperor of China, was photographed during years of isolation, declining health, and heavy dependence on opium. After the fall of Manchukuo, she was captured, imprisoned, and died in 1946, while the location of her remains was never confirmed. In 1912, John Schrank attacked Theodore Roosevelt in Milwaukee, but a steel eyeglass case and a folded 50-page speech slowed the bullet before it reached his chest. Roosevelt still spoke for over an hour, while Schrank later claimed that William McKinley's ghost had ordered the act. The Lykov family fled into the Siberian taiga in the 1930s and lived without contact with the outside world for more than 40 years. Geologists found them in 1978, surviving through hunting, gathering, and a tiny garden while knowing almost nothing about modern history. On January 5, 1975, 2 cars stopped at the broken edge of Hobart's Tasman Bridge after the ship Lake Illawarra struck its supports. Their drivers survived by stopping in time, while a large section of roadway collapsed into the Derwent River below. In December 1942, George Orwell, standing at left, helped produce a BBC radio magazine that introduced contemporary poetry to overseas listeners. Seated below him is T.S. Eliot, with poet and editor Tambi Mutu beside him during this rare literary broadcast. In 1945, German civilians were forced to leave homes across Eastern Europe as borders shifted and post-war expulsions began. Carrying only what they could move by hand, millions entered uncertain journeys toward a country many had never seen. In the 1950s, Havana Police Colonel Esteban Ventura became one of the most feared figures of Fulgencio Batista's government. His name was linked to brutal interrogations and the Humboldt 7 raid, turning him into a lasting symbol of political repression in Cuba. In 1984, former Mexico City Police Chief Arturo Durazo Moreno was photographed after his arrest, ending a career built on political protection and immense personal wealth. A childhood friend of President José López Portillo, he turned the capital's police force into a vast network of bribery, favors, and illegal payments. In 1908, French doctor Ludovic O'Fallowell used the new X-ray technology to reveal how a tightly laced corset reshaped the human torso. The image gave reformers striking visual evidence that fashion could compress the ribs and shift internal organs. In June 1946, Indian soldiers walked among the remains of a church in Hiroshima, nearly 1 year after the atomic bomb destroyed much of the city. The endless rubble shows how entire neighborhoods still lay in ruins while survivors and occupation forces began rebuilding. On August 5, 1944, fighters of the Polish Home Army's Zoska Battalion liberated Jewish prisoners from the Gęsiówka camp during the Warsaw Uprising. This rare photograph captures the survivors soon after freedom, standing beside the men who broke through the camp's defenses. During Iran's Qajar era, 2 black Iranian women were photographed in elaborate court clothing covered with jewelry and embroidered fabric. Their portrait offers a rare view of the African-descended communities who lived and worked within elite Iranian households during the 19th and early 20th centuries. In 1928, 4 young mountain gorillas were photographed after being taken from Central Africa for transfer to Antwerp Zoo. The image reflects an era when rare wildlife was removed for European collections, long before modern conservation rules protected the species. In 1969, rival left-wing student groups in Japan clashed at night using long wooden poles during fierce campus and street confrontations. Their helmets and improvised gear became a striking symbol of the country's intense political unrest at the end of the decade. On October 15, 1953, Britain carried out its first nuclear test on the Australian mainland at Emu Field in South Australia. The towering cloud rose over the remote desert during Operation Totem, leaving contamination that affected nearby land and indigenous communities. Harry Strauss was a feared New York organized crime enforcer during the 1930s and was linked to more than 100 deaths. He rarely carried a weapon, instead using whatever object was nearby, making his methods unpredictable and difficult for police to trace. Around 1897, Norwegian storyteller Eiliv Brattain wandered from farm to farm, carrying nearly everything he owned in a small bundle and metal container. Despite his physical difficulties, his huge collection of fairy tales made him a welcome guest, especially among children. In 1975, photographer Thomas Hupker captured enormous East German apartment blocks rising behind a street portrait of Erich Honecker. The stark winter scene placed the government's promise of modern mass housing beside the constant public presence of its political leader. An Austro-Hungarian soldier pauses for a meal in a trench while keeping his rifle aimed through a narrow firing gap. The photograph shows how even eating at the front demanded constant attention, with food in one hand and the battlefield only inches away. On February 7, 1991, the Irish Republican Army fired homemade mortar rounds toward Downing Street, while Prime Minister John Major and his cabinet were meeting inside. One landed in the garden of Number 10, only yards from the meeting room, but reinforced walls and protected windows prevented a disaster. In April 1945, Soviet troops marched through Vienna while trampling a fallen flag of Nazi Germany as nearby buildings burned. The striking scene captured the final collapse of German control in Austria as the battle for the capital entered its last days. New Zealand taxidermist Charles Dover stands beside Raja, an Indian elephant he carefully reconstructed for Auckland Museum after the animal's death. The enormous life-size specimen preserved Raja's appearance in remarkable detail and remains one of the museum's most memorable displays today. In 1912, Alphonse Bertillon was photographed using the same front and profile system he had created for police identification. The image became a perfect historical irony, showing the inventor of the modern mugshot recorded by his own method. At the 1936 Berlin Olympics, Dora Ratjen finished fourth in the women's high jump, then won the European title 2 years later. In 1938, officials reclassified Ratjen as male, and he lived afterward as Heinrich Ratjen until his death in 2008. In 1980, 2 young Hazara fighters sheltered behind a rough barricade during the Soviet-Afghan War, watching for movement beyond the ruined street. Their simple weapons and improvised position reveal how local resistance groups defended remote communities against a far larger and better equipped army. Millie and Christine McCoy were born conjoined in North Carolina in 1851 and became internationally famous singers known as the Two-Headed Nightingale. They used their earnings to support their family, local causes, and black education, turning a difficult childhood into a life of influence. In 1945, an American soldier stopped to chat with a German woman sunbathing on a wall in post-war Berlin. Their relaxed conversation created a striking contrast with the ruined city around them, capturing a brief return to ordinary life after years of war. In December 1944, German soldier Manfred Pernes was captured during the Battle of the Bulge while wearing an American uniform as part of Operation Greif. Wartime rules classified him as a spy, and his death sentence was carried out soon afterward. At 5:20 in the morning on March 7, 1955, the Turk nuclear test in Nevada created a false sunrise visible across Los Angeles. The distant flash lasted about 20 seconds and briefly lit the entire city skyline as if daylight had arrived before dawn. In 1965, Congolese leader Mobutu traveled to Bonn with an extraordinary delegation of 92 people, far larger than most state visits. West German officials reportedly believed he brought not only trusted aides, but also political rivals, keeping possible opponents close while he was abroad. On April 29, 1945, Soviet troops captured Berlin's Moltke Bridge after fierce fighting near the government district. The crossing opened the final route toward the Reichstag, bringing the symbolic center of Nazi Germany within reach. Write in the comments, which photo did you like the most?